You are currently positioned at an absolute precipice. I am not speaking in metaphors, nor am I using poetic imagery. In this exact, tangible fraction of time, you are hovering on the brink of a monumental shift, one that has been silently tracking you for a far greater period than you could possibly comprehend. It is no longer distant, it has materialized. The portal stands before you, completely unsealed. Make no mistake, the hours unfolding right now are fundamentally different from any ordinary evening you have ever experienced. Stumbling upon this specific broadcast was by no means a random occurrence. Comprehending that fact is your very first prerequisite, the fragment of your being that decided to click, that actively sought out answers, and that was magnetically pulled through a complex web of circumstances to land right here that was absolutely not governed by your everyday, rational brain. Instead, an infinitely more profound layer of your existence recognized a hidden beacon. It has been dormant, patiently listening for this precise vibrational frequency to broadcast. The second it resonated, it maneuvered you here with such flawless accuracy that your logical thoughts will likely spend the rest of this session simply attempting to process the magnitude of it all. Prior to this very moment, a specific iteration of yourself has been operating your life. That past identity carried a familiar name, a deeply ingrained personal history, and a rigid framework of limitations. It harbored strict convictions regarding its own potential, what the universe supposedly owed it, and the ultimate boundaries of its reality. This previous self was governed by predictable habits, habitual methods of perception, reflexive emotional triggers, and an unfortunate tendency to play small. It excelled at rationalizing and ignoring those rare, profound flashes when the universe desperately attempted to awaken it. Acknowledge that this past iteration was valid and genuinely served a vital function in ensuring your survival. It successfully navigated you to this very juncture. However, the lifespan of that specific persona officially expires tonight. Awaiting you just beyond the threshold you are preparing to cross is an entity that possesses a patience completely unbound by linear time. Your authentic, sovereign self. I am not referring to the superficial character built upon past traumas. I am not talking about the persona molded by societal expectations or the opinions of those around you. It is certainly not the identity you frantically cobbled together using the remnants of shattered dreams and defensive emotional walls. Rather, this is the primordial consciousness that predates every single one of those earthly constructs. It is the core essence that will persist long after the illusion shatters the pure, unfiltered original state that your inner spirit has been desperately attempting to awaken for years. The cosmic and personal alignments are finally optimal. Tonight marks your absolute awakening. Furthermore, understand that this exact metaphysical intersection will never present itself to you again. Do not misinterpret this as a warning or a tactic to instill panic. It is merely the objective reality of quantum mechanics. Energetic gateways operate under strict laws. They manifest only during precise alignments, triggered when your internal vibration perfectly synchronizes with the dimension beyond it. Once that portal manifests, the choice is binary. You either advance through the opening, or you remain stagnant. Should you hesitate, the passage will not wait. The alignment dissolves, and the opportunity evaporates. If another pathway ever reveals itself in the future, it will be an entirely unfamiliar gateway situated at a foreign juncture, demanding a completely evolved version of yourself that you would have only attained by stepping through this one today. Therefore, we must establish crystal clarity regarding the nature of this encounter. You are not tuning in to a fleeting burst of inspiration. This is not some superficial motivational seminar designed to make you temporarily feel good. We will not be engaging in generic platitudes about positive thinking, manifestation, or blindly believing in your goals. What you are participating in is a literal crossing of dimensions of profound spiritual ignition. During this session, an undeniable transmutation will occur within your awareness. You will transition from the uncertain, fluid state of questioning your purpose into the rock-solid, collapsed reality of understanding your deepest, truest nature with absolute, unshakable conviction. The instant that realization anchors into your being, regression becomes impossible. The doorway is completely unbarred. Your feet are planted at the edge. It is time to commence. Our first step requires diagnosing the exact internal turbulence you are currently navigating. The sheer fact that you are present here confirms that you have been enduring a highly particular sequence of internal events. It is imperative that we identify these feelings with extreme accuracy, as the act of giving them a title is fundamentally crucial to your transition. By assigning a definitive label to something that has previously felt vague and amorphous, its energy alters. It materializes into something tangible, transforming from an invisible burden into a bridge you can actively walk across. Allow me to outline exactly what you have been silently battling. You have been burdened by an inescapable aura of dissonance. This may not have erupted into a full-blown life crisis, although for a portion of you, the chaos has indeed been devastating, but rather, it manifests as a subtle, pervasive incorrectness. It is the haunting realization that your daily existence, the personality you project, and the mask you wear for society, and even for your own mirror, are fundamentally out of alignment. Imagine forcing yourself into a garment tailored perfectly to your physical dimensions, yet it feels entirely alien against your skin. Or picture conversing flawlessly in a foreign dialect while your heart aches to express itself in your true mother tongue. You are entirely capable of maintaining this facade. In fact, you execute it flawlessly day in and day out. However, it requires a continuous, exhausting mental calculation. There is a persistent, underlying grating sensation generated by the massive gap between the character you are acting out and the raw truth of who you truly are. A number of you have carried this phantom weight for several years. Others have endured it for entire decades. In fact, many of you have grown so accustomed to this profound internal friction that you falsely assumed it was simply the baseline texture of existence. You convinced yourself that every single person suffers this silent agony, that this discomfort is the unavoidable price of being human, and that no alternative reality exists. In an act of survival, you forged a shaky truce with this fundamental misalignment. You constructed your entire livelihood, relationships, and routines around this void, becoming an absolute master at suppressing the discomfort. Yet, and I need your absolute focus on this point in the recent past, a shift has occurred. This quiet dissonance has amplified, mutated into something bizarre, and begun manifesting in forms that demand your attention. The superficial entertainments and routines that once successfully diverted your mind are rapidly failing. The psychological anesthetics and coping strategies you once relied upon are fundamentally wearing off, leaving you entirely exposed to the truth. The awakening pressure, the rationalizations you have perpetually fed your own mind are beginning to echo with an undeniable emptiness, even as the words leave your lips. There is a relentless, mounting force pressing outward from deep within your core. A profound energy is demanding release. That intense, almost suffocating pressure you feel. That is the undeniable ignition of your spirit. It is the authentic essence of who you are finally rebelling against the rigid, artificial vessel that has contained it for so long. Let us speak with absolute candor. This process is deeply uncomfortable. The awakening of one's soul is rarely a soothing, gentle embrace. Rather, it is a profound unraveling. It manifests as intense friction. It is the harrowing sensation of watching the structural integrity of your perceived reality begin to fracture and splinter, long before you can peer through those fissures to behold what awaits on the other side. The only thing you experience is the agonizing sound of breaking. All that registers is a profound destabilization, the sheer, heart-pounding terror of the bedrock crumbling beneath an identity you have dedicated years, or perhaps entire decades, to meticulously assembling, the quantum state of your soul. Yet, to truly grasp this unsettling sensation, we must look to the principles of quantum mechanics. This represents the inaugural mechanism of the gateway I intend to unlock for you this evening. Within the realm of quantum physics exists a phenomenon known as superposition. When a particle resides in this state, it occupies a multitude of realities concurrently. It is neither exclusively here nor entirely there. Instead, it is omnipresent across the entire spectrum of possibility. It acts as a fluid cloud of probability, pure, boundless potential, utterly devoid of rigid definition. It embodies absolutely everything it is capable of becoming, just prior to the instant it solidifies into its actual form. It is crucial to recognize that this quantum fluidity is not a flaw. It is not indicative of brokenness. Conversely, it is the ultimate state of supreme possibility. A particle suspended in superposition holds access to every conceivable trajectory because it has not yet collapsed into a singular, restrictive timeline. However, this vast freedom comes with a significant limitation. It renders the particle entirely paralyzed in the physical world. It cannot maneuver through reality as a tangible entity. It is powerless to exert influence, construct, connect, or materialize in any harmonious manner, simply because it lacks coherence. By remaining a culmination of infinite possibilities, it simultaneously remains absolutely nothing of substance, the catalyst of collapse. So, what exactly catalyzes the abrupt transition from an infinite web of probabilities into a tangible, defined structure? The answer is observation. It requires active measurement, a collision with something unequivocally real. The precise fraction of a second that the particle is observed, the instant a definitive force interacts with it and declares, "I perceive you. I quantify you. I acknowledge your existence." The superposition implodes. The sprawling waves of infinite likelihood instantly condense into a solitary, undeniable focal point. The myriad of alternate realities evaporates, leaving only the concrete truth of what it actually is. From that pivotal juncture onward, the particle assumes a permanent state. It acquires a specific coordinate, a definitive trajectory, and a solid reality. The observation event. Apply this exact scientific principle to your own spiritual essence. For an extended period, your soul has been hovering in a perpetual state of superposition. This is not due to any inherent flaw, defect, or spiritual damage. Rather, the specific environmental prerequisites for a collapse, the precise, piercing observation required to condense your scattered potential into a brilliant, crystalline identity, have simply been absent. You have been floating adrift within a quantum nebula of theoretical versions of yourself. You have carried the weight of every potential path and every unmanifested persona. While this nebula is undeniably magnificent and rich with raw promise, it is also thoroughly depleting. It causes profound disorientation. This is the exact origin of that agonizing friction you have been enduring. On a subconscious level, you recognize that you remain uncollapsed. You lack definition. You have not yet embodied your ultimate truth. Tonight is your catalyst of observation. Tonight marks the profound collision between your waking consciousness and a frequency so intensely real, deep, and uncompromisingly authentic that it will force the collapse. It will compel that sprawling cloud of probabilities to contract violently, resolving the endless what-ifs into the undeniable reality of what you truly are. And what you truly are is utterly phenomenal. It is highly specific and brilliantly unique. This genuine self is completely divorced from the avatar shaped by your past traumas. Instead, it is the magnificent destination that your history has been relentlessly guiding you toward, carefully arranging the necessary trials so you might finally open your eyes. Understand this: your authentic sovereignty is not a character you must artificially fabricate. It is a masterpiece you must simply excavate. You have carried it within you since inception, buried beneath mountains of societal conditioning, behavioral adaptations, theatrical performances, and emotional armor. It is the pure, resonant signal echoing beneath the deafening static of the world. And tonight, that static will fade into silence, granting you the clarity to finally hear it. Navigating the threshold. If you can palpably sense your presence at this dimensional gateway suspended between the artificial frequency you have been broadcasting and your true energetic signature, know that an exact schematic exists for this very transition. It is referred to as the sealed timeline. This document meticulously charts the entire passage with the exactitude of a quantum phase transition, guiding you safely through 5 distinct stages, ranging from initial diagnosis through the sudden collapse, and finally arriving at sealed energetic coherence. You will find access to this map detailed within the description below. However, before we take that fateful step across the threshold, it is mandatory that I illuminate both sides of the divide. A conscious passage is utterly impossible if you remain blind to what you are abandoning and what you are inheriting. The gateway demands absolute clarity of vision. It requires a deliberate choice. Therefore, we must rigorously examine your current coordinates. Hovering on this initial side of the portal, the exact ground you occupy right now stands a heavily fabricated identity. I must approach this next point with extreme delicacy. I am in no way suggesting that your constructed persona is inherently evil, flawed, or something to be ashamed of. I am merely stating an objective fact. It is an artificial construct. It was engineered as a direct defense mechanism in response to external forces. What I am expressing is that this persona is merely an adaptive mechanism, not your essential core. It is a calculated strategy for existence, rather than your fundamental truth. The architectural blueprint of this fabricated self was drafted during the earliest chapters of your life, long before you possessed the vocabulary to articulate it, and well before you could consciously participate in its creation. Your external circumstances began molding an avatar designed specifically to survive those exact conditions. Consider your origins. If your formative environment treated vulnerability as a fatal flaw, your engineered self became an impenetrable fortress. If fading into the background was the only way to guarantee your safety, your persona mastered the art of profound minimization. If you were raised in a dynamic where affection was doled out solely as a reward for achievement, your identity morphed into an endless, exhausting performance. And if love was strictly conditional, you became a chameleon, instantly shifting to fulfill whatever impossible criteria were demanded of you. You must recognize that this is in no way a manifestation of weakness. Quite the contrary, it is a testament to profound intelligence. You are witnessing the most exquisitely complex survival apparatus in the known cosmos, the human psychological defense system. It executed its program directives flawlessly. It adapted, it endured, and it engineered a pathway for you to secure belonging, basic safety, and a functional existence. Your synthetic identity is undeniable proof of your extraordinary resilience and capacity to adapt. Nevertheless, this brilliance carries an agonizing price tag. Every single adaptation you made simultaneously acted as a deviation from your true essence. With every instance you contorted your spirit to satisfy the demands of your environment, you drifted fractionally further from your authentic blueprint. Each time you rehearsed a sanitized, acceptable version of yourself, you actively practiced suppressing the raw, genuine entity beneath. By successfully navigating survival as someone marginally different from who you actually are, you undeniably stayed alive yet. You simultaneously widened the chasm between your external facade and your internal core. As the years bleed into decades, that initial subtle distance expands into an unbridgeable abyss. That abyss eventually curdles into the profound sense of dissonance we discussed earlier. In turn, that wrongness evolves into the suffocating internal pressure you feel today. It is that exact, undeniable pressure that has magnetically pulled you to this broadcast tonight. Furthermore, anchoring you to this side of the threshold is an immense, paralyzing terror. Specifically, it is the deeply entrenched dread that if you were to finally strip away this manufactured armor, if you ceased the relentless performance that has shielded you from harm, absolute catastrophe would follow. Your mind whispers that you will face total rejection, devastating abandonment, and complete exposure. It convinces you that you will be laid bare as utterly insufficient, overwhelmingly too much, or fundamentally unlovable, in a way that your polished avatar has successfully concealed for a lifetime. This specific brand of terror is ancient. It was likely solidified within your psyche long before you possessed the cognitive ability to even name it. It operates like a stealth virus, running silently in the background of every major life pivot you have executed, every romantic or platonic bond you have forged, and every single opportunity you have either chased or sabotaged. It acts as the fierce, unyielding sentinel guarding your fabricated self. It is the persistent whisper insisting, do not alter the status quo, avoid all risk, and under no circumstances, step through that portal. It warns that on the opposite side, the familiar fortress you have always relied upon will instantly disintegrate. Yet, here is the most critical revelation I can offer you regarding this guardian of dread. It is feeding you a falsehood. It is not doing so out of malice. The fear is simply executing its archaic programming. It is an outdated operating system calculating with obsolete data, desperately attempting to shield a past version of you that no longer requires such suffocating protection. In its own misguided way, this fear is deeply loyal. It is an expression of self-preservation and twisted love. However, its assessment of what awaits beyond the gateway is a complete fabrication, primarily because your fear has never actually crossed that boundary. Your fear has merely stood trembling at the precipice, peering into the obscure void, and concluding, I cannot comprehend what exists there. Therefore, it must equal annihilation. But I have traversed that boundary, and I can illuminate exactly what awaits you in that uncharted territory. Just beyond this portal on the reciprocal side of the precipice you are confronting this evening lies the breathtaking reality of embodying your absolute, unfiltered self, perhaps for the very first time since your childhood. This is not a calculated performance of who you think you should be. It is not a strategic maneuver. It is entirely devoid of survival-based adaptations. It is simply you. It is your primordial frequency, your fundamental energetic signature, the uncorrupted essence you embodied long before the world dictated who you were supposed to become. Crossing this threshold also yields a radically transformed relationship with your own cognition. Currently, your mental bandwidth is almost entirely consumed by administrative overhead. You are perpetually managing the fabricated persona, policing the agonizing gap between your true nature and your public display, regulating the constant influx of fear, and enduring the sheer exhaustion of endlessly translating your soul into an acceptable dialect. Once you step through, that massive administrative burden simply evaporates. This is not to suggest that the external circumstances of life instantly become effortless hardships will still exist. However, the profound shift occurs because you are no longer locked in a brutal war of attrition with yourself. You cease squandering your vital life force on propping up an illusion. Suddenly, the massive reserves of energy previously dedicated to your lifelong performance are liberated, becoming entirely available for the actual, visceral experience of living. Finally, the far side of the gate offers an entirely new caliber of human connection. Consider the tragedy of your current dynamic. When others interact with your heavily fortified identity, they are merely shaking hands with your armor. They are responding to a well-rehearsed script, not the author. Consequently, even when their affection is genuine and the bond feels empirically real, a silent, tragic awareness lingers within you. You secretly know they are enamored with a ghost, the curated projection you allow them to see. And that haunting realization inherently constructs an impenetrable, invisible ceiling on the depths of intimacy you can ever truly experience. This pervasive artificiality erects an invisible, impenetrable glass barrier, effectively sealing you off from authentic human belonging. However, the moment you traverse this gateway, that glass barrier shatters completely. The relationships forged in this new, activated paradigm, the souls who naturally gravitate toward your unmasked frequency post-ignition, are the ones capable of truly seeing you. These are the profound, unfiltered bonds that bypass the superficial and actually provide deep, spiritual nourishment. Furthermore, crossing this threshold radically redefines your relationship with your life's calling. Understand that your authentic identity and your ultimate purpose are not distinct, separate entities. They are merely the exact same frequency, radiating in two different directions. One represents your internal essence, while the other is the external manifestation of that essence in the physical realm. When your core identity remains hidden beneath layers of survival tactics, your sense of purpose is similarly fabricated. It is a synthetic construct, stitched together from societal expectations, pragmatic logic, external voices dictating what you excel at, and a desperate clinging to what feels safe. Yet, in this new state of being on the other side of the gate, purpose ceases to be a frustrating puzzle you must frantically solve. Instead, it becomes a spontaneous, undeniable recognition. It is a profound truth that has been lying dormant, simply waiting for your internal vision to clear enough to finally perceive it. The serenity of structural alignment ultimately. The destination beyond this threshold is absolute peace. Do not mistake this for a naive, utopian existence completely devoid of earthly challenges or conflicts. Rather, it is the profound, cellular serenity of perfect structural alignment. It is the deep, fundamental thing when the exhausting mental translation halts, when the lifelong theatrical performance finally concludes. What remains is simply you. You are finally permitted to navigate the cosmos in your true, original geometry, moving through the world as exactly what you are. That profound liberation is precisely what awaits you just beyond this boundary, and the portal is utterly unsealed this evening. A quick note on resonance. If the frequency of this broadcast is actively striking a resonant chord deep within your being, take a brief moment to anchor that connection by liking this video and subscribing to the transmission. This specific channel was meticulously engineered for exactly the caliber of consciousness you possess, standing at this precise developmental precipice. The physics of the threshold. Let us deeply examine the absolute specificity of tonight. There is nothing arbitrary about this convergence. The undeniable reality that you are present, that this specific frequency locked onto your coordinates, and that you are absorbing these exact concepts at this critical juncture in your timeline, this transcends mere coincidence. This is the phenomenon of vibrational resonance. This is pure quantum coherence in action. It is the fundamental architecture of the universe demonstrating its prime directive. Identical frequencies inevitably magnetically attract one another. The dimensional gateway unlocks only when the internal vibration perfectly mirrors the frequency waiting on the opposite side. A massive, tectonic shift has been building within you, and we must demystify the mechanics of why tonight is your climax. Comprehending the hard science behind this transition will allow you to fully surrender to the crossing. Within the realm of thermodynamics and physics, there exists a profound mechanism known as a phase transition. Even if the scientific terminology is foreign to you, you intimately understand the concept. It is the exact process that governs liquid water freezing into solid ice or violently expanding into steam. The underlying elemental substance, the H, two O molecules, the bonded hydrogen and oxygen, remains completely unaltered throughout the event. Yet, the physical expression and state of that substance undergo a radical, absolute metamorphosis. Crucially, this transformation is never a slow, gradual blur. It is a harsh, definitive threshold event. Liquid water does not slowly and continuously morph into ice. It remains entirely liquid until it strikes a mathematically precise thermal boundary. At that exact coordinate, it forcefully crosses the threshold, becoming structurally and behaviorally unrecognizable from its previous form. Below the critical line, fluid water. Above the critical line, solid ice. It is the exact same fundamental material, experiencing a completely revolutionized reality. The illusion of stagnation, the most mesmerizing characteristic of a phase transition, occurs precisely at the boundary line. At the exact instant of metamorphosis, the measurable temperature completely plateaus, even as massive amounts of energetic force continue to be pumped into the system. All of that incoming energy is violently redirected away from heating the substance and is instead consumed entirely by the chaotic process of internal reorganization. The molecular bonds are actively being torn apart and restructured. On the surface, the temperature reads as perfectly stagnant, maintaining an eerie stillness. Yet, beneath that deceptive illusion of inertia, a radical, violent rearrangement is occurring at the microscopic level. Does that specific sensation of suspended animation resonate with you? Many of you have been trapped in that exact, agonizing stillness. You have been navigating an extended chapter where your reality appears completely paralyzed. You pour monumental effort into your personal evolution, yet it yields zero tangible, visible dividends. The physical architecture of your daily life looks hauntingly identical to how it appeared 6 months or a year ago. And yet, despite the lack of external evidence, you intuitively know something is vastly different. A tremendous pressure is building. A profound internal rewiring is occurring just beneath the crust of your awareness. Let me be unequivocally clear. That is not stagnation, and you are not failing. What you are enduring is the spiritual equivalent of latent heat during a phase transition. The entirety of your energetic consciousness is being hijacked to fuel the massive internal restructuring required to sustain your new, evolved state. This is the literal quantum mechanics of your soul's awakening executing its program. Once that profound internal realignment is finalized, when the outdated molecular bonds of your fabricated persona have fully shattered and locked into their new sovereign configuration, the phase transition instantly completes. The thermometer needle jumps. Your external environment rapidly morphs to mirror your new internal frequency, and you violently burst into your updated reality. Tonight signals the absolute completion of that hidden restructuring. Tonight is the exact coordinate where the temperature resumes its climb. Furthermore, there is a secondary, equally profound mechanism activating during this session. I must name it precisely, as it serves as the ultimate catalyst for this particular gateway, and it is deeply rooted in the mind-bending principles of quantum entanglement, the mechanics of spiritual entanglement. To fully comprehend the magnitude of your current position, we must pivot to the profound scientific phenomenon of quantum entanglement. When two subatomic particles collide and interact, they have the potential to forge an unbreakable energetic bond, becoming deeply entangled. Their individual quantum states synchronize so flawlessly that physical distance becomes entirely irrelevant. A stimulus applied to the first particle instantaneously and identically alters the reality of the second, completely defying the vast expanse of space separating them. Albert Einstein notoriously dismissed this mind-bending anomaly as spooky action at a distance, primarily because it utterly shattered the foundational, logical laws of classical physics. How could two entirely disconnected entities instantaneously manipulate one another? How could invisible data seemingly bypass the cosmic speed limit of light itself? The profound underlying truth is that at the microscopic quantum tier of reality, these particles are not actually divorced from one another. They remain an integrated ecosystem. They continuously share a unified energetic blueprint, actively transmitting data through a submerged, subterranean channel that operates entirely outside the standard boundaries of human space and time, the dialogue of your two selves. So, how does this microscopic physics principle govern your spiritual ignition this evening? Your primordial, authentic consciousness and the artificial, constructed avatar you are currently piloting are completely entangled. They belong to the exact same energetic system. Throughout the entirety of your existence, they have been locked in a continuous, invisible dialogue, communicating via a submerged frequency that bypasses your waking, rational mind. Every single triumph, every devastating loss, every fleeting moment of profound joy, and every agonizing bout of confusion you have endured. Every instance you felt that haunting, quiet dissonance, or that overwhelming internal pressure threatening to burst. Whenever you caught a blinding, terrifying glimpse of your own vastness but lacked the capacity to contain it. All of these profound experiences were actually bursts of quantum data, frantically shuttling back and forth between the two opposing poles of your identity. It was a constant, desperate transfer of information between the survival mask you wear and the sovereign entity you actually are. The critical mass of awakening. Tonight, this lifelong entanglement strikes a fever pitch. The sheer volume of quantum data continuously echoing between your two states has finally achieved maximum density. It has reached a blinding clarity and absolute coherence that triggers an unstoppable collapse. It forces the chaotic state of superposition to instantly resolve. It compels your manufactured persona to concede, at the most profound, cellular level, that it is not your ultimate destination. The mask finally realizes it was only ever a temporary bridge pointing toward a greater truth, and that monumental truth has finally arrived. This is the exact, clinical definition of a soul activation viewed through the lens of quantum mechanics. It is the precise fraction of a second when the invisible tether between your past survival self and your true essence becomes so overwhelmingly coherent and undeniable that the artificial architecture inevitably crumbles. The lifelong theatrical performance abruptly terminates, and the real, breathing entity finally steps onto the stage. That transformation happens for you tonight. The architecture of an illusion. Miriam's story. At this juncture, I must offer you a narrative. We rely heavily on storytelling because it is the primal language through which the human spirit downloads complex codes that the logical brain is not yet equipped to decrypt. Narratives are the ancient, sacred maps of dimensional crossings. They are the technology we have always utilized to transmit the heavy, profound mechanics of radical internal change. Allow me to introduce you to a woman we shall refer to as Miriam. By every conceivable metric of societal evaluation, Miriam had engineered a spectacularly successful existence. She occupied a professional role that demanded immense respect from her peers. She curated a beautiful residence that naturally elicited deep admiration. She maintained a romantic partnership that provoked intense jealousy from any spectator who refused to look beneath the polished surface. Her public persona, the precise manner in which she navigated the world and demanded to be perceived, was impeccably tailored, deeply coherent, and undeniably impressive. She had poured blood, sweat, and tears into constructing this flawless fortress, and she harbored a fierce, justified pride in her creation. It is the exact brand of pride an architect feels when admiring their own handiwork, even when a fractured, silent piece of their psyche knows the magnificent structure they erected was fundamentally off-target. The mirage of enough. Miriam had spent her life operating under a profound delusion. She truly believed she was building a foundation toward her eventual freedom, hidden deep beneath the prestigious career, the magazine-worthy home, the picture-perfect romance, and the impenetrable social armor. She knew her authentic self was waiting. She was desperately trying to navigate toward a reality that was less policed, less meticulously rehearsed, and far less guarded. She yearned for a version of existence that she couldn't quite articulate, but intuitively recognized as genuinely real. For the vast majority of her adult years, she clung to the comforting lie that she would eventually arrive. She convinced herself that the synthetic mask was just a temporary measure. She negotiated with her soul, promising that the moment she secured enough financial stability, garnered enough external validation, and collected enough undeniable proof of her worthiness, then, and only then, would she finally drop the act and permit her true self to breathe. The tragedy of her strategy, however, was that the finish line was a mirage. The definition of enough was ruthlessly elastic, constantly stretching further into the horizon. The absolute security she claimed she required before unmasking always demanded just one more promotion, just one more accolade, just one more safety net. Meanwhile, her original, uncorrupted essence, the very soul she swore she was building this empire for, was forced to wait in the agonizing dark, sending distress signals that grew increasingly violent, bizarre, and impossible to ignore as the years bled away. The auditory collapse, then, the inevitable catalyst, struck. It was not birthed from a chaotic, explosive tragedy, although, for many, the awakening is indeed a violent storm. For Miriam, the collapse was hauntingly quiet. She found herself seated in a high-stakes corporate meeting, the exact arena she had spent years training her avatar to dominate. She was articulating a familiar argument, dispensing words she had recited 100 times before. The statements were perfectly accurate within the confines of her artificial reality. They were socially correct, highly appropriate, and met with the usual nodding approval. But mid-sentence, an extraordinary phenomenon occurred. She actively heard herself. She did not merely process the vocabulary. She tuned into the underlying acoustic frequency of her own voice. The visceral realization that flooded her system was chillingly simple. This entity speaking is not me. She did not judge the words as inherently evil, malicious, or deceptive. It was simply the cold, objective fact. This is fundamentally not who I am. That fleeting moment of auditory perception, that pristine, surgical, and absolutely undeniable recognition of the massive chasm separating the voice echoing in the boardroom from the spiritual being. It supposedly belonged to marked the definitive beginning of the end. For her meticulously constructed identity, the irreversible observation, the external parameters of that boardroom remained entirely unchanged. The corporate dialogue pressed forward. The hollow vocabulary continued to fill the air, and the meticulously rehearsed masquerade proceeded without missing a single beat. However, a profound internal witnessing had taken place, and it was entirely irreversible. A critical, spiritual metric had been recorded that could never be erased. The quantum superposition of her identity had officially initiated its collapse. Over the subsequent months, Miriam plunged into a harrowing period of psychological disintegration. The magnificent, shiny empire she had painstakingly erected began to echo with a deafening emptiness. Interpersonal dynamics and friendships she had carefully maintained suddenly felt intolerably heavy and utterly unsustainable. The prestigious profession that served as her defining label now felt like a suffocating, ill-fitting theatrical costume. Her beautiful residence, once the ultimate symbol of her triumph, morphed into a lifeless, two-dimensional stage set. Everything that had once felt so permanent, immovable, and secure within her artificial reality was suddenly exposed as terribly fragile and provisional. It was merely temporary scaffolding hugging the perimeter of an edifice that had never actually been constructed. The latent heat of disintegration. Recall our earlier discussion of the phase transition. This was exactly her latent heat phase. Her entire life force was being violently redirected into a massive internal rewiring process. Even while the external temperature of her life appeared perfectly frozen in time, Miriam was absolutely paralyzed by terror because she lacked this scientific framework. She had no understanding of quantum state collapses or energetic thresholds. She was entirely unaware that the chaotic unspooling she was surviving was not a destructive apocalypse, but a necessary, divine reconfiguration. She genuinely believed she was falling apart. She thought she was forfeiting her entire world, and that the lifelong, haunting sense of wrongness had finally claimed victory, that it had never been a compass pointing toward salvation, but rather a gravitational pull toward utter nothingness. In her absolute panic, she resorted to the classic, desperate maneuver that almost everyone attempts when standing at the precipice. She tried to retreat. She frantically attempted to piece the shattered synthetic identity back together from the inside out. She threw herself back into the performance, desperately trying to re-anchor herself to the hollow career, the superficial relationships, and the shiny public image. She relentlessly lied to herself, rationalizing that the profound auditory revelation in that meeting was merely a momentary glitch, a fleeting hallucination born of a bad day, or a symptom of corporate stress, rather than a definitive distress flare from her own spirit. But the portal was already unlatched, and it is a fundamental law of the universe that you cannot forcibly slam shut a dimensional doorway that has been opened from the inside. The fabricated armor utterly refused to reattach to her spirit. The harder she fought to squeeze back into the old mold, the more agonizingly obvious it became that she was trying to wear a synthetic costume, not her own organic skin. The more intensely she tried to gaslight herself into believing the illusion was reality, the more cartoonishly fake it appeared. The pivotal observation had successfully transpired. The energetic measurement was permanently logged. The superposition had definitively collapsed. Returning to the comfortable, hazy cloud of probability was no longer mathematically possible. The quiet emergence. Consequently, Miriam simply ceased fighting the current. She stopped trying to force her way backward, and within that profound cessation in the quiet surrender of abandoning her desperate attempts to glue together a disintegrating illusion, an utterly unanticipated miracle unfolded. She began to physically, viscerally feel herself. This wasn't an upgraded, optimized, or even a better iteration of herself, though she would eventually grow into all of those things. It was, quite simply, her bare essence. It was the primordial blueprint. It was the original, uncorrupted frequency that had been furiously battering against her ribs for years. The exact same entity that had been transmitting distress codes through the friction, the misery, and the hollow victories was suddenly, quietly, and undeniably standing right there in the room with her. It did not arrive with deafening thunder, cinematic fanfare, or a sudden, omniscient revelation about the secrets of the cosmos. It was just profoundly present. It felt solid and authentic in a manner that absolutely nothing in her engineered life had ever managed to achieve. Anchored in that raw, terrifying, yet beautiful initial encounter with her own truth, the rest of her existence began to actively reorganize. The cost of aliveness. I will not romanticize this transition for you. The aftermath was neither instantaneous nor effortless. It was certainly not devoid of grief. When your sovereign identity finally shatters the surface, it absolutely demands the release of anything built by the imposter. Certain relationships, predicated entirely upon the mutual performance of falsehoods, simply cannot survive the termination of the play. The rigid, artificial structures built to house the fake avatar are often entirely the wrong architectural shape to contain a true, expansive soul. There is a very real, tangible loss extracted during this crossing. I refuse to pretend otherwise, but you must hear exactly what Miriam discovered waiting on the other side of that destruction. The things she lost were never the things she truly feared losing. She did not lose herself. She exclusively lost the very obstacles that had been aggressively preventing her from being herself. Beyond that necessary wreckage, safely across the threshold, she encountered a caliber of pure, electric aliveness that she had never once brushed against in her former, fabricated reality. It was not necessarily constant happiness, nor was it perpetual ease, but it was sheer, unadulterated vitality. It was the breathtaking sensation of actively occupying her own physical form, inhabiting her own timeline, and breathing in her own moments, rather than frantically stage managing them from behind a thick pane of bulletproof glass. The gateway had been unlocked the entire time. She had been unknowingly camped at its edge for a lifetime. It simply required that singular, piercing moment of profound observation in a sterile boardroom, the pristine recognition of the vast void between her spoken words and her actual soul to finally illuminate the threshold. Your boardroom moment, tonight. This very transmission serves as your boardroom catalyst. During this exact hour, an internal reality is being witnessed that can never again be unseen. A spiritual measurement is being taken that cannot be unmeasured. The quantum cloud of your false potential is rapidly collapsing. The portal stands wide open, and your feet are planted firmly on the boundary line. Let us pause the momentum for just a fraction of a second so I can ask you a very direct question. Have you already experienced your own version of that boardroom revelation? Have you endured a jarring instant where you objectively heard your own voice echoing from the outside? A moment where you felt the horrifying, cavernous distance between the character speaking and the spirit trapped within, an exact second where something deep within your chest simply and cleanly declared, "This is absolutely not who I am." I invite you to share that exact fraction of time down in the comments section. Do not write an extensive autobiography. Simply isolate that singular, silent heartbeat when the illusion shattered. By articulating that specific memory within this shared digital sanctuary amongst fellow travelers, poised at the exact same precipice, you are actively participating in the alchemy of the transition. The mere act of declaring it into the void breathes life into the crossing. The anatomy of quantum intention. With that acknowledged, we must dissect the literal mechanics of traversing this portal. Merely recognizing that a gateway has manifested is vastly different from possessing the courage to stride across its threshold. Successfully making this leap demands a highly specialized internal state from you. I refer to this prerequisite as quantum intention. It is imperative that we establish a rigorous definition for this term, as it diverges radically from conventional goal setting in ways that carry monumental significance. Standard intention is fundamentally a cognitive desire. It operates entirely within the shallow waters of the conscious intellect. It manifests as strategic blueprints, New Year's resolutions, and checklist-driven aspirations. While this pedestrian form of willpower is certainly beneficial for maneuvering through the mundane logistics of daily life, it is woefully impotent when tasked with triggering a dimensional phase transition. Conventional motivation possesses absolutely zero capacity to collapse a quantum wave of probability. It cannot, under any circumstances, ignite a dormant spirit. This is because metaphysical mutations occur far below the radar of standard intellectual cognition. They execute at the bedrock layer of your baseline frequency. They operate at the absolute core of what you undeniably are, rather than the superficial projection of what your ego wishes to become. Quantum intention is an entirely different species of power. It has nothing to do with visualizing a desired outcome. Instead, it is the total, harmonious synchronization of your complete biological and energetic architecture. It is the deliberate alignment of your physical vessel, your respiratory rhythm, your mental focus, your autonomic nervous system, and your most profound perception of identity, binding them directly to the ultimate truth that already resides within your core. You are not artificially generating a novel persona. Rather, you are finally acknowledging a frequency that has perpetually existed, actively granting it the permission to materialize into reality, becoming the observer. Reflect once more upon our subatomic particles suspended in a web of infinite probabilities. The external observer does not author the particle's ultimate destiny. The scientist peering through the lens does not dictate the final outcome. The observer's sole function is to witness. They merely establish a connection. Yet, that pure, unadulterated act of witnessing is the exact catalyst that triggers the structural collapse. It forces the chaotic nebula of potential to condense into a singular, undeniable physical fact. Your quantum objective for this session is to embody that observer. You are here to look inward with unflinching honesty. You must forge a visceral connection with the buried architecture of your soul, bypassing the exhausted manager, the anxious protector, and the rehearsed performer. Your task is to cease obsessing over the mask and, instead, peer directly through its eye holes, penetrating down to the sovereign blueprint pulsating beneath. I will now escort you through this profound act of internal witnessing. Consider this the definitive protocol for breaching the boundary. This exact juncture is where the ignition sequence fires. I urge you to approach this not as another mundane mindfulness drill, but as a literal voyage across dimensions. It is not a strenuous task you must forcefully execute. It is an organic unfolding you must surrender to. It requires absolutely zero muscular effort. It only demands pure, crystalline recognition, the threshold crossing protocol. Regardless of your current physical location, permit your biological vessel to completely anchor itself. Surrender the physical burden of your mass to the chair, the floor, or the bed supporting you. Invite your respiratory cycle to decelerate. Do not manipulate the air or force a rhythm. Simply grant your lungs the autonomy to discover their own organic, resonant depth. If your eyes remain open, allow your focus to blur and soften. If it feels more secure, allow your eyelids to drift completely shut. For a fleeting parenthesis in time, command your hyperactive awareness to immediately cease its endless administration. Suspend the relentless strategizing. Terminate the lifelong theatrical performance. Arrest the exhausting, forward-leaning momentum of an intellect that perpetually lives 3 chess moves into a hypothetical future. Silence the chronic calculations that are constantly drafting the next artificial iteration of your personality to feed to the world. Simply halt, absolute suspension. And within the profound vacuum of that deliberate cessation, cast your gaze upon what survives the silence. A distinct presence lingers there, submerged far below the frantic neurological chatter, buried beneath the executive planning and the frantic identity maintenance. Hidden beneath the suffocating layers of terror and rehearsed charm, an entity exists. It is an observer that is intimately aware of the entire chaotic spectacle. It is the silent spectator that has been quietly witnessing your journey since the moment of your birth. It watched with detached clarity as the artificial persona danced on stage. It observed the ancient fear pacing at the gates of your potential. It noted the agonizing dissonance building pressure against your ribs. Yet, crucially, this observer is not entangled in any of those dramas. It remains utterly unbothered, untainted, and undefined by the chaos of the mind. That pure, unadulterated consciousness, that pristine witnessing entity, is the paramount contact you must establish tonight. Why? Because that specific awareness is the precipice. It is the very frame of the portal. This witnessing presence belongs neither to the fabricated ego nor the awakened soul. It acts as the neutral territory separating the two. It is the dimensional doorway incarnate. The catalyst question. Linger within that sanctuary for a few heartbeats. Marinate in the purity of simply observing, floating, suspended in the liminal void, bridging the ghost of your past and the sovereign truth of your present. Now, anchored firmly within that silent observatory, I require you to pose a singular inquiry to your depths. This is not an intellectual riddle. It is absolutely not a puzzle for your analytical brain to dissect, calculate, or solve. It is a profound transmission designed exclusively for your deep awareness to passively absorb. Let this question echo into the dark. What would my fundamental state be had the world never trained me to become something else? Pay strict attention to the phrasing. I am not asking who you would be that invites the ego to draft a fictional character profile. I am asking what you would be. What is the raw elemental texture, the baseline electromagnetic frequency, the primordial constitution that existed long before the world injected its lessons, before the trauma-induced adaptations, before the frantic architectural construction of your defenses? What is the aboriginal force that staked its claim first? The relentless pulse that has survived for decades, furiously attempting to breach the plastic shell of your public avatar? Do not dare to answer this with vocabulary. Refuse the temptation to offer a logical blueprint, a sanitized description, or a neat psychological label. Simply allow your vast, silent awareness to swallow the inquiry whole and become acutely attentive to the internal phenomena that bubble to the surface. Observe the subtle energetic currents. Register the undeniable surge of a truth that completely bypasses the need for intellectual justification. For a significant portion of you, this realization will manifest physically as a sudden, profound unlocking deep within the cavity of your chest. The physicality of the collapse. You might perceive a sudden, profound blossoming within your chest, an expansive, radiant warmth. Do not mistake this for a fleeting human emotion. It is something infinitely more primordial. It is the undeniable sensation of your essential identity finally recognizing its own reflection. It is the precise, miraculous moment your quantum state actively collapses into absolute clarity. For others, this shift will manifest physically within the throat. You may experience a distinct fullness, an unmistakable pressure building just beneath the surface. This is the accumulated weight of every truth you have suppressed, finally ascending. It is your authentic voice, the genuine acoustic signature of your soul beginning to vibrate within a physical vessel that has spent far too long broadcasting an imposter's frequency. Alternatively, you might register a sudden transformation behind your eyes. A startling brightness or an unprecedented crystalline clarity may wash over your vision. The physical world around you might appear to have subtly tilted on its axis, as if the very quality of the light has been purified. This is the literal perspective shift of traversing the gateway. It is the visceral experience of relocating your internal camera, moving the lens away from the artificial avatar and anchoring it firmly within the sovereign soul, retiring the guardian of fear. Naturally, a segment of you will encounter immediate resistance. You will feel that ancient terror surge upward. The primordial guardian, the obsolete protector, will frantically whisper, "Do not cross. Avert your gaze. This territory is uncharted and therefore inherently dangerous. If that paralyzing dread surfaces, I require you to execute a highly specific protocol. Express sincere gratitude. You must offer it profound, authentic thanks. Thank this fear for its years of relentless vigilance. Thank it for the undeniable survival it secured for you, and for the exquisite biological intelligence it represents. Acknowledge its fierce loyalty in showing up to the front lines one final time to do its job. Terminate the contract. Then, with absolute gentleness, boundless love, yet zero room for negotiation, inform it that its contract has officially expired. Redefine the relationship. Calmly explain to this sentinel that the landscape beyond the portal holds no malice. Clarify that the harsh, unforgiving environment it was engineered to defend against is a phantom of the past. Assure it that you are crossing the threshold, and you are inviting it to accompany you no longer as a suffocating warden guarding an illusion, but merely as a quiet companion and a silent witness to your new sovereignty. And then, simply walk through. Abandon the expectation of cinematic drama or explosive revelations. Just cross the line. Allow the silent awareness that has spent a lifetime passively observing your artificial persona to finally and totally recognize its own divine origin. Permit the witness to become the witnessed. Let the observer acknowledge itself as the focal point. Command the original, essential identity, the force that has been fiercely hammering against your ribs for decades, to step into the light. Let it be witnessed. Let it be deeply understood. Let it become your waking reality. This is the ultimate quantum collapse. This marks the definitive finality of your phase transition. It is the absolute ignition of your true soul. In this exact, unrepeatable coordinate of space and time, you are actively breaching the boundary. The portal is unsealed. Advance. The mechanics of integration. Now, we must map the newly discovered territory, because you have either arrived or are currently materializing there. Understand the fundamental mechanics of thresholds. You do not cross into and integrate an entirely new dimension in a single, seamless step. The passage itself is instantaneous, and the spiritual recognition strikes like lightning. But the biological and psychological integration will slowly cascade over the coming days, weeks, and months. The doorway unlocks in a fraction of a second, but the act of fully occupying and breathing life into this new paradigm is the profound work of your immediate future. However, certain transformations take root the very millisecond you cross. The most profound and immediate mutation occurs in your fundamental relationship with the concept of internal truth, the illusion of second-hand knowing. Stationed on the previous side of the divide, imprisoned within the synthetic identity, your intellect was almost entirely derivative. Your repository of knowledge was strictly second-hand. You knew things solely because authority figures dictated them, academic institutions verified them, or society rewarded them. Your entire internal compass for what felt true, correct, or real was violently filtered through a gauntlet of external approval. Again, do not mistake this for foolishness or a lack of intellect. This was the ultimate, calculated survival strategy of your ego. The artificial persona deliberately outsources its truth detection mechanisms to the external environment, because the environment is the source of both mortal threats and vital resources. Remaining obsessively calibrated to the whims of the crowd was how you guaranteed your safety, the sovereignty of inner truth. But once you step onto the soil of your new reality, the mechanics of knowing undergo a radical revolution. You instantly unlock a conduit to a profound, subterranean wisdom that requires absolutely zero external validation. This does not mean you suddenly mutate into an arrogant, unteachable narcissist who rejects all outside data. Rather, it signifies the acquisition of an internal gravitational center that you previously lacked. You now possess your authentic sovereignty as an infallible internal compass. When a concept or a decision perfectly aligns with your essential truth, it registers in your physical form with an entirely different energetic signature than the truths accepted by your old mask. It possesses a unique resonance, an undeniable gravity, and a profound, grounding weight. This is the exact phenomenon society loosely refers to as trusting your intuition, but the mechanical reality of this internal alignment is infinitely more surgical and precise than that casual phrase implies. The sovereignty of internal resonance. This internal compass is absolutely not some ambiguous, fleeting emotion. Rather, it manifests as an exact, tangible vibration, a literal quantum coherence occurring when your sovereign essence perfectly recognizes its mirror image in the external world. The moment you lock onto that profound resonance and utilize it as your primary navigational beacon, the oppressive dictatorship of secondhand knowledge permanently crumbles. You certainly do not stop absorbing data or learning from your environment. However, the internal power dynamic fundamentally flips. Instead of frantically twisting your soul to fit the world's criteria, you now rigorously filter the world's demands through the uncompromising standard of your own authentic nature. The transmutation of time. The subsequent metamorphosis occurs within your psychological orientation to time itself. This shift is incredibly nuanced, yet undeniably revolutionary. While stationed behind the mask of your fabricated identity, time acts as a relentless, suffocating pressure. It serves as a constant, taunting reminder of milestones you supposedly missed, the idealized avatar you have yet to embody, and the agonizing chasm separating your current reality from your hypothetical arrival. The artificial self is locked in a perpetual, exhausting chase, obsessed with a future mirage where it finally earns the right to be deemed enough or successful. Consequently, the present moment is entirely stripped of its inherent value, reduced to nothing more than the frustrating, insufficient distance between your current coordinates and that elusive finish line. Once you step fully across the threshold, your awakened core completely discards this toxic dynamic. This is not to imply that your future ambitions evaporate or cease to hold meaning. The profound difference is that your baseline identity is no longer on a desperate campaign to justify its own existence. It has completely abandoned the grueling construction project of building a worthy self. It simply is, anchored deeply in the bedrock of your indisputable truth. The immediate present suddenly transforms into a habitable sanctuary. For the very first time, you possess the capacity to truly exist right here, fully occupying this specific breath and this exact, unrepeatable geometry of reality. You no longer need to constantly manage the current minute based on how it will look on your future resume. This is the clinical definition of genuine presence. It is not a strenuous mental exercise of forcefully tethering your attention, but the effortless, organic byproduct of a soul that has finally stopped trying to mutate into something it is not. The paradigm shift of adversity. The third profound alteration, and frequently the most startling realization for those who cross, is the radical restructuring of your relationship with difficulty. In the realm of the synthetic self, hardship is instantly weaponized as definitive proof. It is interpreted as damning evidence that you are inherently flawed, that your life choices were catastrophic, or that the cosmos is actively conspiring against you. Obstacles merely validate the ancient fear's central thesis. The universe is a hostile arena. You are fundamentally inadequate, and your mask must work twice as hard to secure your survival. To the ego, difficulty is the ultimate nemesis, precisely because the constructed identity's sole function is to frantically dodge pain by appearing flawlessly impressive and hyper-strategic. Beyond the dimensional gate, your engagement with friction undergoes a massive paradigm shift. I will not feed you the toxic delusion that all pain miraculously vanishes and your existence becomes a frictionless utopia. Hardship absolutely remains, yet its fundamental meaning is transmuted. It ceases to be an indictment of your worth and transforms simply into objective, navigational information. It transitions from an existential threat demanding a defensive maneuver into a raw experience you can courageously encounter. By confronting storms from the fortress of your true essence, you instantly unlock reservoirs of power completely inaccessible to the imposter. You discover a profound, organic resilience. This is not the brittle, white-knuckled endurance of someone terrified of cracking under pressure and ruining their perfect image. It is a deep, fluid, hyper-responsive elasticity rooted in absolute truth. You are granted the ability to bend wildly in the hurricane without snapping. You can absorb the crushing gravitational weight of tragedy without being annihilated by it. Why? Because the entity bearing the load is no longer a hollow, fragile performance. It is a sovereign reality, and genuine physical truths inherently possess an unbreakable structural integrity that theatrical illusions could never dream of achieving. The end of the social hostage negotiation. Finally, the fourth domain to experience a radical overhaul is the architecture of your interpersonal connections. This is arguably the most rapidly apparent transformation, as it instantaneously alters the DNA of every single human interaction you engage in post-ignition. When you pilot the machinery of your constructed identity, your social life is nothing more than a perpetual, exhausting hostage negotiation. Every conversation, regardless of how casual, carries an underlying desperate plea. Am I acceptable? Do you approve of me? Is this curated version of my personality sufficient to guarantee my safety and status in your presence? Because this frantic bartering operates entirely in your subconscious, you rarely recognize it as a calculated transaction. You mistakenly believe this draining performance is simply the standard cost of existing in a society. Yet, this invisible taxation is profoundly depleting. It infects all your relationships with a chronic, low-grade guardedness. It forces you into a perpetual state of energetic rationing, terrifying you into withholding the most magnificent, unpolished fragments of your spirit, out of fear that they might disrupt the negotiation and be deemed unacceptable. Once you establish your presence on the reciprocal side of the boundary, this exhausting internal bartering permanently ceases. This is not due to sudden apathy. You will still deeply value human connection, remain attuned to the feelings of others, and possess a fundamental desire to exchange love and respect. The vital distinction lies in the entity conducting the exchange. The force navigating the interaction is now unapologetically real, and authentic structures have absolutely no need to negotiate their right to exist. They simply occupy their space. When you present yourself as your unvarnished, elemental self, when your sovereign identity steps up to the conversational plate, a miraculous phenomenon ripples through your social sphere. Other individuals instantly detect the shift. They may not possess the vocabulary to intellectualize it, but on a visceral, vibrational level, what quantum physicists define as energetic coherence, they recognize they are engaging with a completely genuine entity. In turn, this unfiltered authenticity acts as an irresistible magnetic force, actively pulling the buried, authentic fragments out of the people you engage with. This explains why the alliances and friendships cultivated post-activation are a completely different breed than the superficial networks forged by your avatar. These new bonds are rooted in profound spiritual contact rather than theatrical performance. They operate on deep vibrational resonance instead of calculated social maneuvering. You are finally experiencing the collision of two raw, breathing truths, rather than overseeing two highly manicured holograms cautiously managing their public relations. That critical shift in the architecture of your interactions marks the definitive boundary between a connection that merely functions for survival and a connection that genuinely nourishes the human spirit. The architecture of true purpose, the fifth, and arguably most monumental metamorphosis, dictates your relationship with your ultimate calling. We must linger here, as grasping this concept is absolutely paramount. Every single conscious entity possesses a specific calling. Strip away any mystical connotations. This is pure quantum mechanics applied to the human spirit. Every essential energetic blueprint, Every aboriginal frequency and every true sovereign identity contains an inherent trajectory. It harbors an organic momentum, a definitive orientation, and a precise function it was physically designed to execute. This calling is not an accessory you acquire. It is the literal manifestation of your core identity placed into kinetic motion. It is the visible evidence of your soul actively living in the world, rather than merely existing within it. While trapped inside the constructed avatar, perceiving this calling is virtually impossible. The deafening roar of your lifelong performance, the exhausting management of ancient fears, and the relentless, frantic negotiations with your environment generate a wall of static that completely jams the signal. Tragedies unfold every day as countless individuals expire without ever successfully tuning into that frequency. Instead, they pledge allegiance to the hollow ambitions of the constructed self, which always revolve around a desperate mandate to be safe, acceptable, and impressively sufficient. They construct empires that appear highly functional, even extraordinarily successful by societal metrics, yet they are eternally plagued by that agonizing, spectral friction. Their lives look perfect on paper, but wear like a garment stitched from abrasive material. The clarity of the signal, however, the moment you cross the threshold, the interference clears, and your calling rings out with crystalline clarity. For some, this revelation arrives like a tidal wave. In a sudden, undeniable, and overwhelming rush of comprehension, you instantly recognize exactly what your purpose is, who you are meant to embody, and the precise physical manifestation your soul demands in this dimension. For others, the signal tunes in more gradually. It unfolds as a steadily intensifying internal compass, a series of compounding realizations, and a deepening sense of directional clarity that patiently crystallizes over a matter of weeks into an unshakable sense of purpose. Regardless of the timeline, the transmission eventually becomes unmistakable, and the very second that signal is clear enough to demand action, your entire reality begins to rapidly reorganize around its gravitational pull. Suddenly, paralyzing decisions become effortless. The chaotic hierarchy of your priorities sharply snaps into focus. The terrifying dilemma of what to aggressively pursue and what to mercilessly sever becomes painfully obvious. This does not mean your existence magically becomes devoid of complication. Rather, you finally possess a functional compass locked onto your authentic true north, rather than violently spinning toward the magnetic north of societal validation. The precision of the open gate. This brings me back to my initial, uncompromising declaration. You will absolutely not receive a second opportunity at this specific convergence. To clarify, I am not implying that if you hesitate tonight, your soul will evaporate or your calling will permanently self-destruct. The essential identity does not vanish, but I must emphasize the absolute, mathematical precision of this exact gateway, the unique architecture of your current circumstances, the precise level of your spiritual readiness, and the exact sequence of events that violently collided to deposit you at this coordinate. This identical formulation of variables will never align in this exact geometry again. You will encounter other portals throughout your timeline. The human soul operates on a timescale of infinite patience and will relentlessly engineer new scenarios to force your awakening. But understand this. The specific portal currently unsealed before you vibrates at a highly specialized frequency. It offers a very particular caliber of transition. If you refuse the leap tonight, the gateway that eventually replaces it will be fundamentally different. It will almost certainly be a significantly more agonizing and difficult threshold to cross. It will be a portal demanding a level of evolution you could only have achieved by stepping through the one you are staring at right now. Spiritual activation operates in cumulative tiers. Every threshold crossed serves as the vital bedrock for the next ascension. Conversely, if a gateway is acknowledged, examined, and then cowardly abandoned, your trajectory violently deroutes. The journey does not end, but the terrain becomes infinitely more treacherous. The spirit may be patient, but quantum mechanics are flawlessly precise. The exact calibration of your current readiness, the cumulative weight of your personal history, the specific environmental triggers, and the exact, suffocating internal pressure that dragged you to this broadcast tonight. This specific alignment is a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence. The absence of panic and the proof of readiness. Please understand, this is absolutely not a cause for panic. This is not an invitation to aggressively force a metamorphosis if your internal architecture is not yet prepared. Rather, this is a call for brutal, uncompromising honesty regarding your own readiness, because the undeniable truth is, you are ready. Your physical and energetic presence here is the ultimate proof. Your internal vibration perfectly synchronized with the external call. The dimensional portal unsealed itself. Your soul broadcasted a homing beacon, and your consciousness tracked it to this exact coordinate. You are fully equipped. Take the step across. Let us pivot from the metaphysical to the material. We must outline exactly what this spiritual ignition demands of you in highly practical, everyday terms. We need to examine how your daily existence, your decision-making frameworks, and your physical navigation of reality will radically mutate. This threshold crossing is far more than a hidden, internal revelation. It demands loud, tangible, external manifestation. Acknowledging and preparing for these real-world implications is a mandatory phase of completing your transition. Implication 1. The eradication of the apology. The foremost practical consequence of activating your sovereign identity is the absolute cessation of apologies. You must permanently stop apologizing for your fundamental nature. While this directive sounds elementary, executing it is profoundly difficult. For years, your manufactured ego has functioned as a relentless public relations manager, constantly issuing apologies on behalf of your true soul. It apologized for you being too intense or too sensitive, too loud or too invisible, too driven or lacking ambition. This reflex to apologize has become so deeply ingrained in your behavioral programming that you likely no longer recognize it as an apology. You probably mistake it for basic politeness, necessary humility, or standard social grace. It is an apology. It is a continuous, degrading broadcast to the universe that your raw essence is inherently flawed and requires rigorous modification, softening, and filtering before it is acceptable for public consumption. Once you cross the gateway, maintaining this apologetic posture becomes energetically impossible. This does not mean you transform into a callous, arrogant entity devoid of empathy. You will still be deeply considerate, highly thoughtful, and responsive to the emotional landscapes of others. But your essential self flatly refuses to apologize for the mere fact of its own existence. The glaring hypocrisy of existing while simultaneously begging forgiveness for that existence simply cannot survive the activation process. Therefore, you must actively train yourself, and it is a rigorous discipline that requires time to occupy your space without offering a disclaimer. You must practice projecting your voice without immediate qualification and physically inhabiting the full, expansive perimeter of your soul, rather than the shrunken, apologetic footprint your artificial self previously squeezed into. Implication 2. The dismantling of artificial architecture. The second tangible repercussion dictates a massive clearing of inventory. You are going to have to dismantle and release structures that were exclusively engineered to accommodate your fake persona. This is universally the phase that triggers the fiercest resistance, and I refuse to sugarcoat the severity of it. Upon the awakening of your true frequency, it becomes glaringly obvious that certain pillars of your current reality-specific relationships, deeply held obligations, and lifelong societal roles were architected solely to house the imposter, not the sovereign entity. Your authentic spirit simply cannot contort itself to fit inside these cramped artificial cages. This does not imply that these structures were inherently malicious, or that the people within them are toxic. It simply means they were custom-built around a phantom version of yourself that has officially ceased to be the primary operator. The survivors. Naturally, some of these dynamics will evolve. Relationships anchored in genuine, profound human connection, rather than the mutual exchange of theatrical performances, possess the elasticity to survive and even profoundly flourish post-activation. Certain commitments will reveal themselves to be deeply aligned with your newly discovered trajectory, gaining immense significance. The casualties. However, a significant portion of your reality will simply not survive the transition. Friendships built entirely on the shaky foundation of shared illusions will collapse. Commitments forged by the frightened ego to serve the frightened ego's agenda will instantly lose their structural integrity. When your awakened soul evaluates these misaligned artifacts, it recognizes them as incompatible geometry. The transition will violently demand that you release these artifacts. Yes, this process will be accompanied by profound grief. You will mourn the termination of dynamics that felt incredibly real during their lifespan, but you must sever the ties regardless. This act of releasing is not a manifestation of cruelty. It is the ultimate expression of personal integrity. It is your soul outright refusing to prop up dead architecture that forces you to act rather than exist. Furthermore, this painful severing is a profound act of mercy both to yourself and to the individuals involved, who ultimately deserve to interact with a living, breathing human rather than a heavily managed ghost. Implication 3. A new paradigm of uncertainty. The third monumental shift requires you to forge an entirely new psychological contract with the concept of uncertainty. To your constructed, survival-based identity, uncertainty is the ultimate antagonist. It is pure terror. Why? Because you cannot successfully execute a flawless theatrical performance if you are blind to the environmental expectations of your audience. Consequently, your ego burns through astronomical reserves of vital energy, attempting to eradicate the unknown. It obsessively tries to script the future, aggressively micromanage outcomes, map out every catastrophic contingency, and neurotically read the energetic temperature of a room before even stepping through the doorway. It demands absolute preparation for every conceivable alternate reality, ensuring its mask is perfectly calibrated for survival. Your awakened essence, conversely, approaches the unknown with an entirely different posture. This is not because your true self is apathetic toward the trajectory of your life or dismissive of outcomes. The core difference lies in the bedrock of your stability. Your fabricated ego can only maintain its balance if the outside world acts in highly predictable ways. It requires a sterile, artificially controlled environment to survive. Conversely, your sovereign essence draws its unshakable grounding entirely from within. It knows its own nature with such absolute certainty that external chaos becomes fundamentally irrelevant. Operating from this empowered vantage point, venturing into the abyss of the unknown ceases to be a terrifying gamble. You can bravely walk into uncharted territory because you finally know exactly who is doing the walking. You can stare down the unpredictable because your core definition is no longer reliant on predictable outcomes. You develop the capacity to endure total ambiguity, simply because your fundamental value is not attached to how a specific scenario unfolds. This is the grounded, practical translation of what ancient spiritual lineages have always referred to as faith. I am not speaking of blind religious dogma, toxic positivity, or the desperate visualization of a specific future. It is the profound, quiet confidence that no matter what chaotic timeline the universe manifests, your essential self will be fully equipped to handle it. You possess the innate certainty that your raw, unvarnished truth is entirely sufficient to meet whatever reality ultimately presents. Implication 4. The relentless practice of integration. Finally, the fourth practical mandate, and the one that bridges the gap between spiritual revelation and physical reality, is the requirement to actively broadcast your essential identity. You must execute this with fierce deliberation, relentless consistency, and ever-expanding bravery. Let me be unequivocally clear. Stepping through this dimensional gate is merely the prologue. The crossing ignites the journey. It does not conclude it. The true odyssey awaiting you on the other side demands that you aggressively practice being your authentic self out in the tangible world. This means injecting your true frequency into your romantic partnerships, your professional endeavors, your microscopic daily habits, and the literal way you consume and navigate time. We call this rigorous discipline integration. It is the absolute most vital, foundational labor you will undertake following the collapse of your mask. Why? Because a newly birthed spiritual identity is incredibly tender. It is pure and undeniably real, yet it has not yet anchored itself deeply into your muscle memory. It lacks the hardened armor of prolonged expression. It is still learning how to stand tall and breathe without immediately issuing an apology for its existence. Furthermore, the external world, which has spent a lifetime interacting comfortably with your heavily managed avatar, will be thoroughly disoriented by your sudden authenticity. Pushback is absolutely guaranteed. Friction is unavoidable. You will encounter volatile moments where your obsolete survival programming aggressively attempts a hostile takeover. Your ancient fears will inevitably flood your nervous system, desperate to drag you back behind the safety of the synthetic mask. The protocol of the return. In those critical microseconds of panic, your solitary mission is to execute the practice of the return. You must violently pull yourself back into the seat of the silent observer, reconnect with that pristine witnessing presence, and pose the ultimate catalyst inquiry once more. What is my fundamental state, stripped of the world's conditioning? And in that moment of clarity, you must consciously elect to embody that sovereign truth instead of retreating to the shell. You do not win this war in one cinematic, explosive climax. You win it through 1,000 quiet, repetitive choices. You consistently choose your soul over your ego, with the friction gradually decreasing and the ease continually expanding, until this new dimensional state permanently solidifies. This is exactly how the phase transition finalizes its work. This is the precise moment the internal temperature needle surges upward. You relentlessly practice operating as your true self, until the concept of practice evaporates, leaving only the effortless reality of simply being. The heavy burden of temporal grief. At this juncture, I must address a very specific, heavy resonance that I can palpably feel occupying this digital space. It is a complex emotion hovering in the shadows of this transmission, a potent alchemy that isn't entirely hope, isn't strictly terror, and isn't purely sorrow, but a haunting amalgamation of all three. A profound number of you are currently buckling under the suffocating weight of lost time. You are being crushed by the horrifying realization that this magnificent gateway has been available to you for far longer than it ever should have been. You realize that your authentic spirit has been screaming for release for years, perhaps entire decades, while your frightened ego spent that exact same duration violently suffocating it. There is a uniquely agonizing flavor of morning that strikes when you finally stand at the threshold, look over your shoulder, and recognize just how long that door has been unlocked. You tally the countless times you wandered up to the edge, only to turn coward and flee. You mourn the massive chapters of your timeline squandered on the wrong side of the divide. I need to address that specific flavor of mourning with surgical precision, offering you raw mechanics rather than empty, soothing platitudes. The time you seemingly forfeited to the synthetic timeline was absolutely not wasted. Hear me clearly. This is not a cheap psychological consolation prize. This is a hard, indisputable fact of quantum mechanics. Every single traumatic loop you endured within the confines of your fake identity, every painful contortion you performed to fit in, every hollow victory you secured, and every agonizing wave of dissonance you stubbornly pushed through, all of those brutal elements were the mandatory ingredients required to fuel tonight's ignition. They were the literal latent heat driving your spiritual phase transition. Every ounce of that suffering was raw, energetic currency being deposited into the massive restructuring effort necessary to sustain your new reality. The brutal truth is, you lacked the capacity to breach this portal a decade ago. 10 years in the past, you simply did not possess the highly specific molecular configuration of trauma, exhaustion, wisdom, and absolute readiness that makes tonight's leap mathematically possible. The universe does not operate its temporal checkpoints arbitrarily. The gateway only unlocks when the internal algorithms are absolutely flawless. And achieving that flawless condition required every single tear, mistake, detour, and delay that preceded this exact hour. Do not misunderstand me. The sorrow you feel is incredibly real, and it is entirely appropriate. Mourning the years stolen by an imposter is a sacred, legitimate grieving process that you must fully metabolize, not spiritually bypass. But you must never mistake that grief as evidence that your timeline was a failure. The alchemy of temporal grief. Rather than viewing your sorrow as a testament to failure, recognize it as absolute proof of your newfound clarity. This grief is the undeniable evidence that you can finally, cleanly distinguish between the agonizing hours squandered on theatrical performances and the authentic reality you are about to inhabit. The very capacity to perceive this stark contrast is the direct, alchemical product of every hardship and detour that preceded this hour. Furthermore, I must dismantle another toxic illusion for those of you currently suffocating under the weight of lost time. The ignition of your sovereign identity does not operate on a punitive, ticking deadline fabricated by your ego's panic. Your fundamental soul will never abandon you. Your raw essence possesses no expiration date. When I stated earlier that you will not receive a second chance, I meant that this exact geometric alignment of readiness, environment, and internal pressure will never duplicate itself. However, it is an absolute falsehood to believe you only get one isolated shot at authenticity before being permanently condemned to the dark. The spirit is infinitely patient. Your true self is fiercely relentless. Should you cower and retreat tonight, the universe will eventually construct another crossing point. It will engineer a new crisis, a new revelation, a new gateway, but the undeniable reality remains. This specific portal is unsealed right now. The pressing question is not whether you will eventually cross some threshold in a distant, hypothetical future. The question is whether you possess the courage to step through this specific gateway tonight, while your internal vibration perfectly mirrors the frequency calling to you from the other side. The time is exactly now. The final boss, the illusion of unworthiness. We must now confront the final, most insidious specter lurking at the edge of this boundary, the devastating illusion of worthiness. For a vast majority of you, the ultimate barrier preventing your leap is not strictly terror or sorrow. It is a quiet, venomous conviction whispering that your unmasked, primordial self is fundamentally unfit for public consumption. It is the deep-seated lie that your true frequency is somehow too intense, too deficient, or inherently incompatible with the reality you inhabit. You must understand that this toxic belief is the absolute final line of defense deployed by your manufactured ego. It is the core security protocol of your artificial matrix, and it is the most critical hurdle you must clearly identify before crossing. If you unknowingly smuggle this lie through the portal, it will act as a Trojan horse, immediately infecting your new reality. It will hijack your essential identity from the inside out, instantly beginning to police it, apologize for it, and ruthlessly whittle it down until it fits perfectly back into the suffocating mold of societal approval. Therefore, let me imprint this truth into your consciousness with uncompromising clarity. Your raw, unadulterated essence, the foundational blueprint stripped of all survival tactics, is not a crisis requiring mitigation. It is not an abrasive excess that must be aggressively sanded down, nor is it a hollow deficit requiring frantic overcompensation. It is not too much, and it is certainly not lacking. It is exactly, flawlessly what it is, and that precise, unfiltered frequency is the exact medicine this dying paradigm is desperately starved for. The universal impact of personal sovereignty. Society absolutely does not require another highly polished performance. The globe is completely saturated with synthetic avatars meticulously curating their public relations. What humanity genuinely hungers for, what your loved ones are secretly begging for, and what your life's true work demands, is an entity that is undeniably present, a human being who is visceral, unguarded, and real. Your authentic sovereignty is not a social liability. It is the ultimate offering. By stepping through this threshold tonight, you are not merely liberating yourself. Your transition is a service to everyone who will ever intersect with your unmasked truth. It is a gift to the projects and passions that can only be properly executed by your authentic frequency. It is a transmission that will permanently alter anyone fortunate enough to encounter a human being who is fully, unapologetically themselves. The passage itself is deeply intimate, but the resulting impact is universally monumental. Advance through the gateway, the architecture of true community. Finally, let us illuminate the caliber of human connection that thrives on the reciprocal side of this boundary. One of the most breathtaking mutations you will experience post-ignition is a radical shift in who you magnetically attract, and the fundamental reasons why. Stationed in your previous, constructed reality, your social circles were primarily built upon a foundation of mutual masquerades. You naturally gravitated toward individuals projecting similar illusions, or those who unknowingly validated and required your specific survival mechanisms. I am not calling this a fake community. It provided genuine utility, basic safety, and temporary comfort. Yet, it was a fragile ecosystem built entirely on superficial presentations and silent, unconscious contracts regarding who everyone was pretending to be. Upon breaching this threshold, an entirely revolutionized paradigm of community activates. This new network is forged in the fires of pure vibrational resonance rather than the exhaustion of social performance. It is a tribe established upon the profound, electric recognition of two sovereign identities colliding. It is the undeniable, kinetic sensation of encountering another human, operating from their raw bedrock, and feeling the instant, undeniable coherence of that union. It mirrors the exact physics of two identically tuned acoustic forks. Strike one, and the other instantly begins to hum in perfect, invisible sympathy. This is how awakened souls effortlessly recognize their twin frequencies, cutting straight through the deafening static of a world obsessed with wearing masks. This newly activated tribe is inherently more exclusive and physically smaller than your previous circle. This contraction is inevitable, because not everyone in your current orbit is prepared to abandon their own camouflage, and not everyone is equipped to handle the unvarnished intensity of your true self. Certain individuals will find your new frequency deeply unsettling. Many will heavily prefer the heavily managed, predictable avatar you used to be. A significant number will quietly drift into the background once the theatrical play they relied upon shuts down. However, the companions who endure this transition, combined with the new souls who are magnetically drawn to your awakened state, will offer a caliber of connection that the ego-driven community could never possibly achieve. These bonds are anchored in absolute, unfiltered contact. They are built upon the sacred architecture of two authentic, breathing entities colliding, entirely bypassing the exhausting diplomacy of two artificial masks aggressively managing their PR, becoming a dimensional catalyst. I must emphasize a remarkably potent phenomenon regarding this new paradigm of community, as it is one of the most breathtaking consequences of crossing the threshold. When you fully commit to operating from your sovereign core, you inadvertently transform into a dimensional gateway for those around you. Simply by existing in your unmanaged, unapologetic, and fully expressed state, you radiate a profound frequency that makes the gate intensely visible to others. You achieve this not by becoming a self-appointed guru, preaching at them, aggressively trying to force their awakening, or handing them unsolicited spiritual roadmaps. You achieve it simply because absolute authenticity is highly contagious in the most divine sense of the word. When a slumbering individual violently collides with a human being who is genuinely and completely themselves, the dormant essential identity within that slumbering individual violently stirs. Their buried soul recognizes your active frequency. It immediately senses the proximity of a portal. Simply by occupying the truth of what you are, you effortlessly become the ultimate catalyst for others to remember what they are. This is the ultimate ripple effect of your ignition. This is the precise mechanics of why your personal crossing is inherently universal, and why the collective desperately requires you to make this leap. Every single sovereign individual who breaches their own boundary makes the threshold exponentially more tangible, accessible, and undeniable for the entire collective. Every activation violently shifts the atmospheric pressure, making the next activation infinitely easier to achieve. You are not merely crossing this boundary for your own liberation this evening. You are crossing it for every single human who will ever cross paths with your unmasked truth. You are crossing it for the authentic tribe awaiting your arrival. You are crossing it for the invisible, cascading ripple that originates with your ignition and will violently expand outward in ways your mind cannot yet begin to calculate or measure. The portal is unsealed. The tribe awaits. Step through. A moment for the slumbering. Speaking directly to the power of that invisible ripple, pause your momentum for a fraction of a second. I want you to mentally isolate a specific individual currently in your life who you know is paralyzed at their own invisible gateway. You can viscerally sense it radiating from them, even if they lack the vocabulary to articulate the struggle. You recognize that identical, suffocating internal friction, the agonizing disconnect between the mask they wear and the soul screaming beneath it. I invite you to describe their energy in the comments below. Do not expose their name or identity. Merely describe the essence of their struggle. A profound function of this awakened community is the active holding of space for those who have not yet breached the perimeter. By anonymously naming their silent battle in this digital sanctuary, you are intentionally directing and activating frequency straight toward their coordinates. The architecture of integration. Now, we must meticulously map out the terrain of integration. We need to dissect exactly what the immediate days, weeks, and months following this transition will demand of you, equipping you with the clarity and grounded steadiness required to successfully navigate the turbulence. The paramount rule you must burn into your consciousness is this: integration is aggressively nonlinear. The ignition strikes in a singular, explosive microsecond, but the physical embodiment of that blast requires an extended timeline. This journey is not a flawless, uninterrupted escalator ride from your outdated self directly into enlightenment. The process mimics the mechanics of dawn. It is never an instantaneous snap from pitch black into blinding noon. It is a slow, pulsing brightening. You will experience hours of searing, unprecedented clarity, followed abruptly by the aggressive return of deep shadows. The overarching trajectory is undeniably moving toward the light, but the minute-to-minute reality will violently fluctuate. You are going to experience days following this broadcast where your sovereign identity commands the wheel with absolute authority. You will navigate the physical world in your authentic skin, moving with a profound sense of rightness and effortless grace that genuinely feels like returning to your ancestral home. And, inevitably, you will endure days where the artificial avatar violently attempts a coup. The ancient survival programming will unexpectedly reboot. The primal terror will flood your nervous system. The defensive mechanisms will snap back into place, and you will suddenly realize, often hours after the fact, that you have been operating from your heavily managed, fake persona. This is absolutely not a failure. This is the literal definition of integration. This is the chaotic reality of your nervous system learning how to stabilize a radically new baseline. This is the agonizing, slow-motion completion of your quantum phase transition. The required discipline in those frustrating moments when you recognize you have regressed back into the plastic shell is absolute zero self-condemnation. Do not unleash frustration upon yourself. Reject the catastrophic conclusion that the ignition sequence aborted, that you are back at square one, or that the awakening was merely a fleeting hallucination. Your sole responsibility is to simply notice. From the detached vantage point of the silent observer, the sovereign essence you now irrefutably know exists. Simply acknowledge that the outdated defense system momentarily hijacked the controls. Then, with extreme gentleness and absolutely zero theatrical drama, forcefully redirect your compass. Make the active choice to return. Actively step back through the portal in the quiet, mundane, repetitive manner that physical integration demands. The construction of sovereign scaffolding. The second fundamental truth of integration is the unavoidable necessity of erecting entirely new infrastructure. The habits, routines, energy management systems, and time allocation models that currently govern your life were exclusively engineered to support and protect the fake avatar. A handful of these structures may possess the elasticity to survive the transition, the architecture of a sovereign reality. However, a vast majority of your previous systems will require a total demolition and reconstruction from the ground up. The gritty, pragmatic, day-to-day labor of engineering a physical reality that actively nourishes your sovereign essence rather than merely shielding your fabricated ego is the core, non-negotiable mandate of integration. This demands an uncompromising forensic audit of your energetic economy. You must become hyper-vigilant regarding what interactions inject vitality into your spirit and what environments parasitize your life force, making your choices accordingly. Your decisions must no longer be dictated by the frantic survival requirements of your mask. They must be solely governed by the profound necessities of your authentic soul. It requires a rigorous examination of which friendships, professional arenas, and daily habits physically align you with your ultimate truth, and which ones violently drag you backward into the exhausting theatrical performance. You are now tasked with making ruthlessly practical decisions concerning the allocation of your time, your emotional bandwidth, and your loyalties, decisions that honor the essential identity, rather than attempting to manage or suppress it. I will not pretend this is a painless endeavor. Some of these verdicts will be agonizing. They will demand a fierce, uncompromising bravery. Inevitably, you will disappoint those individuals who were comfortably reliant on your heavily managed fate. Yet, with every single boundary you draw from your sovereign core, with every deliberate choice that honors your true frequency, rather than your rehearsed script, you permanently reinforce this new dimensional paradigm. You anchor it into the earth. You cement the integration, making it deeper, stronger, and infinitely more unshakable. The unforeseen dividends of alignment. The third critical revelation regarding your integration period is the sudden manifestation of entirely unforeseen dividends. The ignition of your aboriginal identity does far more than simply alter your internal psychological landscape. It exponentially expands your tangible capabilities in the physical world, because the monumental reservoirs of energy you previously squandered on stage managing your illusion are suddenly emancipated. That raw power is now entirely available for visceral, dynamic living. The blinding clarity born from finally understanding your true nature illuminates your cosmic assignment with zero ambiguity, allowing you to clearly see what you were actually put on this earth to execute. Furthermore, the pure, unadulterated acoustic resonance of your sovereign spirit acts as an irresistible magnetic beacon. It actively pulls the exact people, synchronistic opportunities, and vital circumstances that share your frequency directly into your orbit. These harmonic alignments will feel nothing short of miraculous. Phenomena will begin to materialize in your reality that your cynical, constructed ego would have immediately dismissed as utterly impossible, wildly improbable, or suspiciously too good to be true. Understand this clearly. The universe has not arbitrarily decided to bless you out of thin air. Rather, you have finely calibrated your internal receiver to the exact frequency required to perceive and accept the abundance that was perpetually hovering around you. The gateway was eternally present. The treasures were always waiting on the reciprocal side. You were simply rendered blind to them by the suffocating helmet of your artificial persona, the infinite horizon of the soul. The fourth and final truth you must absorb about the integration process is its infinite, ongoing nature. You must abandon the fantasy of a definitive finish line. There is absolutely no static destination where the work permanently ceases, where you arrive at a flawless plateau of eternal enlightenment with zero further maintenance required. The human soul is a boundless, violently expanding entity. Your essential identity will perpetually deepen and evolve, layer by intricate layer. You will inevitably encounter new dimensional portals, face infinitely more complex thresholds, and execute further crossings. Crucially, every future ascension will rely entirely upon the structural integrity of the leap you are making tonight. Each subsequent gateway will demand an upgraded iteration of yourself that could only have been forged by surviving this exact transition. Therefore, tonight's crossing is not the climax of your narrative. It is merely the thrilling prologue to a radically revolutionized chapter. And this specific volume, the one authored by your awakened consciousness, fueled by your unmasked spirit, and lived out loud without a single apology, is the exact masterpiece you were always meant to be writing. The view from the sovereign summit. And so, we finally plant our feet upon the new soil. Here is where we arrive. This is the reciprocal side of the gateway. Let us survey the landscape from this elevated coordinate, from the triumphant vantage point of having surrendered to the activation of having boldly stepped through the threshold that awaited you for decades and finally shattered open tonight. Looking backward over your shoulder, your obsolete, constructed ego takes on an entirely different silhouette. Viewed from this sanctuary, you can finally observe it through a lens of profound, overwhelming compassion, a grace that was fundamentally impossible while you were trapped inside its suffocating walls. You can objectively marvel at its sheer biological intelligence. You can honor how flawlessly it adapted to your trauma, and how fiercely and faithfully it shielded you from the exact terrors you needed defending against. You can bow to it in gratitude without ever again submitting to its dictatorship. You can thank it for its service without ever again being held hostage in its prison. Similarly, the ancient guardian of fear appears radically diminished. It has not evaporated entirely, it rarely does, and that is a perfectly acceptable aspect of the human condition. But its terrifying illusion is shattered. It is finally exposed as exactly what it is, an archaic software program attempting to calculate modern reality using obsolete, corrupted data. Anchored in your sovereign truth, you can now interact with this fear using a steady, grounded mercy that the fake persona could never possibly muster. You can acknowledge its presence in the room without handing it the steering wheel. You can feel its tremor without being paralyzed by its command. You can allow it to exist simply as a passenger, never again as the primary pilot. Finally, take inventory of your external existence. It may not instantly appear drastically more glamorous or objectively more successful according to society's hollow metrics, at least not in the immediate aftermath, though that monumental success is inevitably approaching. However, it feels undeniably, radically yours. It is deeply aligned. It is viscerally authentic. The raw texture of your daily routine, the granular quality of your immediate experience, and the sheer density of your presence within your own heartbeat have shifted in a manner that defies linguistic explanation, yet is absolutely impossible to miss. The static has cleared. The lens has snapped into terrifyingly beautiful focus. The elusive entity that was always hovering just out of sight has finally materialized. That entity is your uncompromising, sovereign identity. That is your soul, fully activated, deeply present, and undeniably real. That is the exact, primordial force that battered against your ribs for all those years, desperately transmitting distress flares through the agonizing friction, the haunting sense of wrongness, and the utterly exhausting, hollow theatrical performances of your past. The sovereign arrival, that profound essence has definitively arrived. It has seamlessly merged with your present reality. It is you, in this exact, breathing microsecond. Do not mistake this for some detached, elevated deity hovering above your existence, nor is it merely an optimized, upgraded iteration of the mask you have been desperately striving to perfect. It is, quite simply, your rawest self. It is the unvarnished, authentic you, standing fully and completely in the light at long last. Standing on this newfound, sovereign soil and casting your gaze back toward the threshold you just traversed, a profound realization washes over you, a truth that was entirely incomprehensible while you were trapped in the old paradigm. You finally grasp exactly why this transition demanded a violent, absolute gateway. You understand why the passage had to manifest as a singular, explosive rupture in time, rather than a comfortable, agonizingly slow evolution. You see clearly why the human spirit demands an instantaneous ignition rather than a sluggish, incremental crawl. The necessity of the rupture, the mechanics behind this are undeniable. Your fabricated ego, the lifelong theatrical production, the ancient terror, and the exhausting administrative apparatus cannot simply be phased out piece by piece. They must be aggressively and decisively breached. You are absolutely required to hit a critical mass, a tipping point where your sovereign essence crystallizes into something vastly more tangible and real than the synthetic camouflage. You must arrive at the exact coordinate where your uncorrupted truth commands more presence than your rehearsed script. It is the precise juncture where the portal transforms from a distant mirage into a gaping, unsealed doorway right in front of you, leaving absolutely zero alternatives but to stride boldly through the opening. That ultimate coordinate in time and space is tonight. Whether you have already bounded across the line, are currently navigating the chaotic passage, or are hovering breathlessly at the absolute precipice, you can palpably feel the energetic boundary buzzing beneath your souls. You can feel the massive draft of the open gateway beckoning you forward. You can acutely sense your aboriginal identity hammering against your ribcage one final, desperate time. Yet, this is the very last time it will ever need to fight for your attention, because tonight is the night you finally shatter the cage and unleash it into the physical realm. The permanent collapse. This is your absolute point of no return. This is the precise, razor-thin margin where your obsolete timeline violently terminates and your authentic destiny is birthed. This is the literal execution of the quantum collapse. This marks the definitive, triumphant completion of your spiritual phase transition. This is the undeniable, explosive activation of your sovereign soul, reclaiming its rightful throne. Understand with absolute certainty that regression is now mathematically impossible. Do not interpret this as a tragic loss or the depressing slam of a door locking you out of your past. Rather, embrace it as the immaculate, clinical law of quantum physics. Once a wave function has collapsed into a defined physical reality, it fundamentally loses the capacity to dissolve back into a murky cloud of infinite superposition. An observation, once recorded by the universe, can never be unrecorded. Once your primordial truth has been witnessed truly, deeply, and undeniably illuminated in the spotlight of your own consciousness, it becomes permanently burned into your vision. You can never unsee your own majesty. You finally possess the undisputed knowledge of what you are. You have successfully docked with the original, divine blueprint. You have felt the pure, electric vibration of your rawest being coursing through your veins, and that profound realization, that intimate connection, that earth-shattering recognition is irreversibly permanent. The threshold is now a fixture in your rearview mirror. This new, expansive dimension is your permanent residence. The authentic timeline commences. The entire trajectory of the existence that unravels from this coordinate forward will be utterly unrecognizable compared to the timeline you left behind. Why? Because the architect steering the ship is a completely different entity. You are no longer relying on a highly polished, heavily upgraded version of your fake avatar. You have stopped tweaking the choreography of your performance. Instead, you are now a genuine, breathing human being, fiercely occupying an actual life, firmly anchored in the unshakable bedrock of what you undeniably are. This profound liberation is the exact treasure you were magnetically drawn here to claim tonight. This sovereign freedom is the ultimate destination your spirit was furiously tunneling toward all these years. This unshakable peace is the true north that all your lifelong friction and agonizing sense of wrongness were desperately trying to point you toward. This breathtaking reality is exactly what the open portal was offering you since the day you were born. Welcome, at long last, to the reciprocal side of the veil. Welcome to the embodiment of your untamed, true identity. Welcome to the authentic timeline that commences right now. Not in a slow, agonizing trickle. Not in some hypothetical distant future. Not waiting for the illusory moment when external conditions become perfect. But right here, right now, in this explosive present, during this exact broadcast, suspended on this side of the dimensional divide, your soul has officially achieved full ignition. Your sovereign truth is absolutely real. The profound, terrifying passage is officially complete. And as you prepare to draw your very first inhalation of air within this newly conquered territory, allow that breath to be